welcome to my screen recording of today's lesson on preparation for the summative assessment. Just bear with me, I'm not that technologically advanced, so I'm going to give this my best shot and we're just going to see how it goes. This is currently take 3 of the episode. So anyway, basically I wanted to do this because I know a lot of you are away for the BC literacy test tomorrow. But as a result of the snow day that we had, I have already pushed our schedule back a lesson. And I think that if we want to be able to succeed in the creative writing half of the unit, then we do need to have our literary studies assessment on Monday. Okay, so just have a listen to this recording, watch me write a model answer and go through the rubric over the weekend or whenever you've got some spare time, and just make sure that you are preparing as much as possible for it, because during the summative you won't be allowed your notes, but you will be allowed copies of the poem, and I will be sharing the assessment questions with you, okay, before Monday as well. But anyway, let's get into it. So based on our formatives, really, most of us did this really well. So what I'm highlighting here, most of us did really well with this part, which is really positive because this is kind of the hardest bit. What we needed help with was looking at the effect on the reader. So we need to think about the poet. We need to think about the poet's intentions and the message that they want to convey and the context that they are writing within. But then we also need to think about the effect on the reader. So this is then separated into two parts: a reader at the time of writing and a reader at the in today's society. So like you guys, for example. When we were studying an extract from The Prelude by William Wordsworth, that would be a really good example where we would have to talk about the effect on the reader at the time and the effect on the reader now. So a contemporary reader and a modern reader. Okay? Contemporary being at the time of writing. Language and style. Again, most of us did really well on this. A lot of us getting 3 out of 4. A lot of us even getting 4 out of 4. Okay. Now, this encompasses capturing the nuanced impact of poetic techniques on the poems. So what is the impact of a metaphor, for example, or repetition, or assonance or sibilance, those kind of poetic techniques. What's the impact of those? So it's not just the way we're writing, it's our fluency in capturing the impact of those techniques. So really, actually, a lot of us slipped down though for our formatives on our thesis statement. A lot of us missed this out, or maybe just wrote something which was kind of vague and didn't really point to where your paragraph or couple of paragraphs were leading. So some of us got 1 out of 4, some of us got 2 out of 4. And that's an easy fix. The same with the conclusion. Some of us didn't have time because we only had 30 minutes. And some of you got 0 out of 4 for that because you missed it out. But I think probably being in grade 10, you guys do know how to write a conclusion. So this should be an easy 4 marks for you to get for the summative. Okay, so let's get into my model answer. Now, I have already started this to save a little bit of time, but this is the assessment question that I'm going to be answering today. So compare Agard and Minhinnick's approaches to historical reclamation and the portrayal of conflict in their poems. Conflict being a really key word here because our unit is called Power and Conflict Poetry. And historical reclamation. Okay. Now, what I would expect you to do is if there's vocabulary or phrases in the assessment questions that I'm giving you that you're not sure of, the first thing you need to do is define what those mean. Okay. So I've then given myself some hints. In your essay, you could include an analysis of language and structural devices, explore how linguistic fusion, metaphor, repetition, imagery, and symbolism contribute to the poet's themes of historical identity, and provide examples and discuss how these devices enhance the impact of their exploration. So I'm just gonna go straight into it. So if I was to write an introduction, I would start with this. Okay, so here I've linked straight back to the assessment question. I've explicitly said to my examiner or my reader the poems that I'm going to be comparing, and the themes that I want to explore as well. So they both delve into the theme of historical identity, providing significant insights into the complexities of personal and cultural histories. So it's kind of the micro sense of the personal within the macro sense of the cultural. Okay, so I'm just going to explain that a little bit more now. Oh, typo. Okay, so now I'm using these kind of contrasting transitions. So words like while is going to explicitly point to my examiner or my reader that I'm about to compare or contrast. Let's just sort this out. Okay, again, I'm pointing towards what I'm going to be discussing in my essay. So I'm thinking about the vivid imagery and the sensory details that I'm later going to explore. So this is the next part. This essay will examine the distinct use of language. So now I'm being really blunt. I'm saying exactly what this essay is going to be about, what I'm going to be talking about. So what this says to your reader, it makes them feel really safe when they're reading your work, because it's like, okay, this student knows exactly where this essay's heading and what they're going to explore. So it makes me feel like, okay, this student really does know what they're going to be talking about. It makes me have faith in you. I'm trying to use ambitious vocabulary as well, because I obviously want to get marks for language and style. So words like suppressed and suppression, reclamation, linguistic, enduring. These are all ambitious words which are going to help me with my language and style category of the rubric. So that's what my introduction is. Now that is quite long, so yours doesn't have to be as long, but of course I'm doing a model answer. I'm now going to move on. Sorry, I just started typing. I'm now going to move on to my thesis statement. So this is slightly more direct as well. You can put these two things together. These don't have to be separate, but I just wanted to kind of make the step-by-step super easy for you to follow. With your thesis statement, you want to be thinking about how is your essay contributing to the conversation? So the kind of academic conversation around this subject. That's how I always think of it anyway. How are you adding value? Okay. I now need a different phrase for shedding light on, because I've already used that. Okay, so my thesis has kind of repeated this section of my introduction, but in a slightly different way. I might want to work on that. But for me, this would be an example of an extending start of an essay. So this would get you extending if you were to write something similar to this. Okay, I think I'm going to stop it there, and I'm going to start a new recording for the body paragraphs because I don't want this to go on and on and on for hours. So it should give you a bit of a break. Hang on. Let me try. Hi everyone, I'm back. I'm back with the body paragraphs. So the first paragraph that I would like to focus on is language and cultural identity. So these are two things that I've planned to discuss regarding both poems. So like before, I'm just going to start writing, and I'm going to give you like a bit of advice as I'm writing when I find things that I want you to know. I think that's okay. Okay. Right. So when I talk about linguistic fusion, which came up here, so this was in the question. Okay, this is what I'm talking about. So this kind of mesh between two identities. Okay, so intersectionality almost. So linguistic fusion both between an English dialect and a Caribbean dialect. Okay. Right, so now I'm going to move on to some evidence because I've made my point and I'm now going to use some evidence to back this up. So I'm going to say the phrase "dem tell me" Sorry, I'm becoming very English teacher right now with this language. Okay, again, I'm now going to explicitly point my reader towards the fact that I am contrasting. This is going to get me marks. Like, this is what one poet does, and this is evidence that this poet does this, and then this is what the other poet does, and then you can go into some analysis as well. But this is why I didn't want to limit you to using the CEC structure, because it's a comparison and a contrast. So we want to be looking at the similarities and the differences of the poems and the poets. And I think that using CEC can limit us to just proficient sometimes. I think if we're really extending, we want it to be super interwoven. We want that contrast to be interwoven. We don't want it to be, this is everything one poet does, and this is what everything the other poet does. The end. We want it to kind of glide seamlessly or effortlessly between each. So while this poet does this, Agard does this. This is the effect of both of these decisions, you know. So there are different ways to structure it. There's no right or wrong way. You can use CEC. I just didn't want to limit you to that. Ooh. So, oh wait, hang on. So what am I doing? Minhinnick. Oh yeah. So now I'm going to come back to the vivid imagery and the sensory details that I mentioned earlier on in the introduction. Oh my goodness, I can't type. Now I'm going to put like a little, as a result of my analysis, I'm using my opinion here as well, which is okay. So as a result of like the analysis that I've done between these things, I'm saying that Agard celebrates the uniqueness of his cultural identity, whereas Minhinnick's choice of language creates a broader, more inclusive reflection on the consequences of conflict. So we've got that idea between the micro, the personal, and the macro, the universal. So that's how I've decided to compare it. Now, I could say a lot more about this, but I'm aware that you've only got 60 minutes to write this thing. Okay, so historical reclamation then. Now, this is going to be a bit harder for me to write under pressure because it's quite a complex notion, but okay, I'm going to give it a go. Just reflecting, I think I'm using quite similar sentence starters for the beginnings of my paragraphs. That could be something that I improve on later on or go back to edit. I think this idea of reclamation, it could be really interesting for you to reflect on this in your journals even, and the work that you would have done previously in grade 8 and 9 or before that with Indigenous modules or topics or units of work, truth and reconciliation and reclaiming one's identity and one's history and one's land. So that could be a really nice text to world connection that you could make in your journal. coming back to this idea of suppression as well that I spoke about in the introduction. And then I'm going to use some new evidence as well. So I'm talking about this language technique in particular, the metaphor. So bandage up my eye with me own history. Really interesting that this is at the beginning of the poem as well. And then I'm going to say explicitly conveys the act of reclaiming one's history, suggesting deliberate and conscious. And then I do, again, with this, on the other hand, I'm using those explicit transition phrases to guide the reader, always guiding the reader. You want them to always trust what you're going to say. Okay, on the other hand. Again, you could go into a lot more detail about what I'm talking about right now. Okay, this idea of like breaking free, liberation, what that could mean, how that links to the structure of the poem or the form of the poem. Okay, but again, I am very aware of time. I don't want to go over an hour. I don't even know how long I've been typing for anyway. Oh, look at my personification there. Oh my goodness. Oh, wait. Okay, so that's my second paragraph. Okay, I am going to do a third because I do really want to get extending. So I'm going to try and do a third. And then I'm going to get on to a conclusion. So let's give this a go. And again, this is just what I have planned to write on for my body paragraphs, but yours could be completely different. Like your points of comparison could be completely different, and that's fine. And I'm back to the historical suppression that I've spoken about previously. So it's almost like that golden thread. You want a golden thread working, like snaking through your poem, your essay. It's going to ground it. I've forgotten the phrase. I'm just going to have to come back to that, sorry. My bad. I can't remember the phrase. But I do know the effect of alliteration generally, so that's how I'm able to continue with this. Wait, let's do contrastingly, because I want to mix up my vocab. Okay, I'm just gonna stop there because I've finished my body paragraphs now. I'm just going to try and find out what this quote is, and then I'm going to do the conclusion, and then we're done. Okay, I think looking back, I think I've done quite a good job so far, personally. But I do think that I'm quite critical of my writing, and I think that I could have added more single word analysis and maybe even more context as well. But again, you know, I'm aware of time. If I had all the time in the world, I could go back and work on this endlessly. But I think it's looking good. It's definitely looking like an extending. Okay. For the final episode of Miss Wright's Model Answer. So, in the interim, I have just changed this part here. So I found the phrase. It was "Dem tell me about Lord Nelson and Waterloo, but dem never tell me about Shaka the Great Zulu." So this contributes to the poem's rhythmic quality, but it also emphasises the speaker's frustration with the omission of certain historical figures from the traditional narrative. So the idea that the victors write the history books, and the minority groups over the course of history that have been silenced, he wants to give a voice to, because they are part of his history, part of his identity. And it's this repetition of the D sound which really emphasizes that. Actually, to be more specific, I could call this consonance. So consonance is a type of alliteration which just focuses on the repetition of a consonant sound. So it's more like it's a harsh sound. The same with the B. That's also repeated in the poem. Okay, so it's those two sounds that repeat in this quote, for example. Okay, yeah, so I have made my point, I've given my evidence, and then I've said what the effect of that is. Why would this poet decide to use consonants, okay, to get their point across? Okay, right, finally, moving on to the conclusion. Now, this is obviously where a lot of you fell down in the formative, which, you know, is fine, but we're just going to go through that now. So I'm going to say, in conclusion, and this really, I want to wrap up the whole thing. So really, I'm going to be going full circle. I'm going to be coming back to my thesis statement, back to my introduction, and then mentioning some of the things that I've already spoken about in my body paragraphs. So I'm going to say, in conclusion, the language devices employed by Agard and Minhinnick contribute to the depth and okay, coming back to that fancy phrase, linguistic fusion, which I defined earlier on in the video. Ooh. Oh my goodness, I've just realised I didn't mention juxtaposition. Oh my gosh, my favourite word. How could I? Next time, next time. So now I'm going back to the reader as well, really important. can feel myself repeating myself here a little bit too much, I think. I think this does need some work. But at the end of the day, this would get 4 out of 4 on the rubric, okay? So, there we have it. Miss Wright's model answer. That's the wrong thing. There we go. Okay, I'm sure many of you will be able to judge this, maybe give me some areas for improvement and some what went wells. I would love to hear them. But yes, I hope that helps somewhat in your preparation for Monday. I'm sure it will. And I'm sure you're all going to do absolutely amazing. I can't wait to read them. And if you have any questions before Monday, please get in contact. If you want to do a practice paper and, you know, for me to have a look at it, or a practice paragraph and me to give you some feedback on that, then I'm so up for it. So keep the communication coming. Okay, Miss Wright is signing out.